Hello everyone. Whoa, a little bit tinny. As Dr. Martin said, my name is Philip Haslam. I am the author of the book, When Money Destroys Nations. It's a book about Zimbabwe's hyperinflation and about ordinary people living on the ground. And it's a book about our world today as countries print money on a large scale. So Dr. Martin mentioned a few numbers. I'm going to just sort of test your memory. United States in the last couple of years since the financial crisis, how much money have they printed since 2008? $3.5 trillion. That's 12 zeros. How about Europe? Europe this year announced a money printing program, the European Central Bank. How much? Anyone? Any guesses? 1.1 trillion euros. What are they doing with this money? They're printing the money and they're giving it to the governments effectively to repay their debts. How about Japan? How much money is Japan printing at the moment? Come on, I want some guesses for this one. 80 trillion yen every year. They're printing this money and they're giving it to the government to pay off their debts. Now, who thinks this is a good thing? Any hands? Who thinks it's a bad thing? I think it's a bad thing. But a lot of people are not really sure here. Okay, so this is something I've been fascinated with for the last 17 years. So I got into this. I was studying economics at the University of Cape Town, and there they started teaching something that they teach at every university around the world to economists, and that is this, that you stimulate an economy by going into debt, number one, by consuming in debt, and number two, by printing money. Now, I thought this is strange. You know, you're printing money out of nothing, and using that and it sort of creates a whole lot of value. Why don't we just print a whole lot more and sort of create more and more value? And I got into this, and the more I got into it, the more I saw that there's some significant weaknesses with that sort of thinking. And I developed a program, a presentation that looks at teaching people how the global banking system works, or how money and banking work in our world today. And I was doing one of these presentations, and my current co-author said to me, "Hey, Phil, you know, we have an example of what happens when a country prints money on a large scale right next door to us in Zimbabwe. Okay, I'm telling you, there are stories there that no one has heard." So I thought, geez, that's really interesting. I wonder if that's the case. Why don't I go and interview a couple of Zimbabweans? Are there any Zimbabweans in the room? Yes? Okay, great. Willie to you. And so I started interviewing a couple of Zimbabweans, and the stories were fascinating, completely fascinating. Money printing in Zimbabwe affected every single person in the country, and it affected them in unique and personal ways. I started interviewing more and more people, and then I thought, sheesh, no, what I need to do is I need to go to Zim, and I need to go to the various cities, and I need to get a real strong case, and I need to write a book on what actually happened. And hence, the result is this book. But in the process, interviewing these people, you know, it surprised me because I have this economist hat on, and I'm thinking, you know, money printing, quantitative easing, larger sort of terms and concepts. And yet, with Zimbabweans, when you speak to them, the reality is that these are personal lives, just like you and I. You know, typically, I mean, often I'd interview people and I'd say, yeah, you know, tell me your stories about hyperinflation. You know, I'm very interested. We were right next door to you. And the response was often, you know, I can't really remember. I kind of blocked it out. It was quite bad. And then I'd say, well, what did you do when the stores emptied? Or what did you do when you couldn't get any fuel? Or when the water was cut? And then the stories came. And they were fascinating, heartfelt, you know, tragic in some senses, and yet, you know, beautiful in other senses. Because this emphasized to me that money printing, economics, debt consumption, these are all nice economic terms, and yet they have very real practical implications for people living on the ground like you and I. Okay, so with that, let me tell you a little bit about Zimbabwe's story. I'll then get into some other facts, and we'll then dive into what's happening in our world today. Hopefully then, sort of finish for lunch. Have any questions if you have any. Okay, so if we look at a timeline of Zimbabwe's hyperinflation, in 1980, the country came to political independence. There was a colonial war beforehand, and Robert Mugabe was part of a liberation forces, and they had free and fair elections in 1980. From that time on, the world around just embraced them completely. And very specifically, the World Bank in particular, but all the global institutions in general, started to lend to Zimbabwe significantly. They came and they said, look, guys, hey, you need money. We're your people. And they started to lend in US dollars. At the same time, Robert Mugabe began to centralize power around himself so that there was sort of a sense of sustainability of his government. And everything was happy. There was a debt boom that made it look like the economy was very, very successful. But something happened. The debts began to grow to a point where they were unsustainable. And in 1997, there was the government actually announced a pension plan, a pension payout, and the World Bank said, hang on a second, I'm not sure if you can actually repay these debts. I need you to give evidence that you can repay these debts. And at that stage, the relationship broke down, and the credit crisis hit the country. Suddenly people started to say, well, hang on a second, I'm not sure if I can lend any money to the government, and they started to take their money out of the country. That then led to what was known as Black Friday. Okay, that was a pivotal moment when it was a credit crisis where lenders stopped lending. And in response to Black Friday, what did the government do? They, instead of borrowing money, they said, well, hang on a second, I can just print money, and I can continue to run my life just the way I did. So they started printing money in 1997. But the problem with printing money is that if you are giving goods and services, real goods and services for your time and labor and effort, and someone's in return giving you newly printed pieces of paper, after a while you start to say, hang on, give me something that's real. Okay? In response, the Zimbabwean government, as in all hyperinflations, they had to increase the amount of control on the people to use the money and to keep prices low. So you found this interesting thing where lenders stopped lending, money printing started happening, and increasing government control. So that led in 2000 to the land invasions, which has been well publicized in South Africa. By 2002, the country started to experience significant fuel shortages. 2003, there was mass immigration, and the banks were having money shortages, and you had the sort of problem of not enough money, a weird thing that you get in hyperinflations, where you're printing, but there's not enough money. We'll get to that. By 2006, all the stores had emptied. You couldn't get any food or anything through the normal retail sector. 2006 to 2008 was the rampant hyperinflation that we typically know as what hyperinflation is. And by 2009, the currency was worthless. It crashed out of use. And in exchange, we got US dollars in Zimbabwe. So people actually physically trade pieces of US dollars on the notes, on the streets. So this is a picture of a guy in Zim carrying what's known as bricks. So it became, money printing devalued the value of each piece of paper, so that you couldn't actually buy things with that paper. You actually had to have a wad of papers to actually buy things, And so those became known as bricks, and that became the currency for a little while. But even then, after a while, those bricks actually became worthless. The pulp value of the paper was more valuable than the currency notes actually on the denominations. So the economy rapidly descended into a barter economy. Okay, so instead of people trading for money, they then would trade for other goods and services. People, so with the supply chain breaking down, people would literally meet behind the golf club. There would be little sort of informal places where people would meet and, hey, so-and-so's brought a bucket of milk. I heard about these stories of these guys bringing milk, freshly squeezed from the cow, and trading it in exchange for wood or grain in exchange for fuel. One of the interesting things, with a barter economy, you have a very interesting thing because money is taken away. What do you do without money? How do you get things? After a while, people begin to find alternatives that can act as useful money. From an economics perspective, it's fascinating. Okay, so for instance, in the women's prisons, tampons began to were so valuable that they began to circulate as a medium of exchange. They actually became an alternative currency in the women's prisons. Okay, another alternative currency. If you had a barter economy, what would you want? What was the thing that you would need the most? Well, in Zimbabwe, it was fuel. People needed fuel. That's sort of the key ingredient for life, evidently. And people would literally begin to pour out and measure out sort of cupfuls of fuel and begin to price things in liters of fuel. Then some bright guy came up with this incredible idea. He said, well, why don't we receive some money in advance? We'll give people a little piece of paper that says, I owe you 20 liters of fuel, called a fuel voucher, as you can see over there. They go across the border and bring the fuel back, and then the person who has the fuel voucher can redeem the fuel. But the interesting thing is those fuel vouchers began to circulate as money, so that by the end of the hyperinflation in Zimbabwe, it was a de facto currency. People would pay legal fees in fuel vouchers. I mean, exceptionally fascinating. Water was cut, as I'd mentioned, and fuel ran out. You couldn't get any fuel at the stations. And as a result, couldn't get any electricity, and people had to live off generators, typically for their electricity, which only increased the demand for fuel, because you need fuel to run your generator. And you typically need fuel to run a generator to bring up water if you have a borehole, as an example. These are some of the interesting things that happened in Zimbabwe. Lastly, pensioners lost everything. In Zimbabwe, if you saved anything, you lost it all, because the value of what you saved could purchase less and less and less as it went along. And so currently we have in Zimbabwe an entire generation, a whole pensioner, like a generation who'd saved most of their lives and don't have any savings. It's a sad story, and yet it's typical of hyperinflations generally. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom out. Okay, let's just talk high level now concepts. That was Zimbabwe, and now let's pretend as though we are on an island economy. Okay, we found this new little island. We're calling it Perco Island, and we're trading goods and services. So and so over here is doing some farming. Someone's building houses, and we've got our own little currency. We'll call it Perco currency. Okay, what if we decided for everyone here, why don't we just go and double the amount of Perco currency that everyone has? So I'll be a central bank. I'll say, okay, guys, today's Christmas. We're going to double the amount of money and give it to everyone in proportion to the amount of money that they have. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Who thinks it's a good thing? Oh, who thinks it's a bad thing? Okay, some people are not really sure. No, well, what would actually happen? In short, what would happen is prices would rise. They would double. Okay, suddenly there's more money, a whole lot more money chasing the same amount of goods, and prices rise. But there's an economic process that actually happens. Because if you got given a whole lot of money, the first thing you would do, what would you do if I just said, hey, I'm going to double the amount of money in your bank account? What would you do? You go spend it. Okay, great. You're going to go and buy real goods and services. Hey, let's all go to the shops right now and go and get these goods. Now the shops have got a problem, because they sold goods on at the old prices. Now they need to purchase, they need to restock their stores on new prices. The benefit that you gain by running out and quickly buying things is the loss that the store owners had. Money printing makes it very good for consumers, not so good for producers. Okay? The other thing that you would do, what else would anyone do? If you got a whole lot of money, what would you do? Pay off your debt. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I'm going to flip. I've got this huge household debt. I'm going to quickly go pay it off. It's the same concept. People who get newly printed money and who have borrowed, well, they're in a great position because they can go pay off their debts. But if you're lending money, well, then you're in a terrible position. Okay, because you're getting the same amount of money back, but it can only buy you half the goods that it could originally. So money printing does some funny things to the society. It creates these skews, and it creates what we call a boom, as everyone goes out and buys goods and services and pays off their debt, and then a bust, as suppliers begin to say, well, hang on, actually, I can't make the money that I made, and they shut down. Boom and bust scenario. Now, let's just change this little island economy. What if we printed money only for special interest groups? We said, all of you people at the back over there, no, this is not a nice place of the island. The best place of the island is those people in the front. And there are not that many of us. So what we're going to do is, we're special needs people. And we're going to print money and give it to us. Okay? A similar scenario. So you get the same boom and bust and the same thing with prices and everything. But now here's something different. The people here who get the newly printed money benefit. Great, I get newly printed money. The guys at the back don't benefit. So I benefit, I go and buy things, you begin to benefit a little bit more, and this is a little pocket of growth here. But slowly, that newly printed money makes its way to the back of the room, and those people at the back of the room don't receive any benefits. All they have is higher prices. My benefit over here, in this little special interest group, is the cost for the people at the back. Okay? It causes increased inequality. It makes the rich richer and the poor poorer. Okay? And what's going to happen? All those people at the back, they're going to be like, geez, it's no longer like worthwhile to be staying at the back. They're going to migrate. They're going to come to the front, and they're in their droves, and there's not going to be enough space, and we'll sort of begin to haggle about who gets the area of the space. It has real geographic influence. In our society today, money printing is based around main city centers. And you'll see around the world, a trend since the money printing started is massive amounts of urbanization. It's not profitable to be working in rural areas. It's profitable to be in the cities. Finally, let's change the scenario. So same scenario, I'm printing money, giving it to the people in the front. But now I change it a little bit. And instead of giving it to the people in the front, I lend it to the people in the front. I get the boom and bust, the credit, the customer-driven boom, and the suppliers don't do well. The borrowers do well, but the lenders don't do well. We have this migration, we have this inequality, but now we've got an additional problem. That money must be paid back. Printing money, giving it to them and saying, look, this is not forever. I want it back. And when the time comes for it to be paid back, well, there's a big problem because now you had an increase in the amount of money. Now I'm taking some money out of the economy and it's shrinking again. Okay, and I have a big dilemma and a big problem. Okay, this is how the global banking system works. Okay, I've hopefully highlighted to you how your banking system in South Africa works, how the banking system works in Europe, England, and America. And I'll show it to you here. What actually happens is you have a central bank. The central bank will print money, and it will lend it to the banks. Okay? The banks will then take that amount of money and create multiple levels more money than the amount of money that they have in hand. Approximately 40 to 50 times more money. And who do they lend it to? They lend it to people like you and I. Okay? But they're printing money and they're lending it out. Okay? So what we have in society is that our entire money system is based on debt. Our entire global economic system is based on, I need to lend money. If I want to increase this money supply, I need to actually lend it into society. And it becomes structural debt. And what we've seen over the last 40 years is a rise in the amount of debt. And all the money that's been created is all backed by debt. And so you've got this dual, sort of two pillars, as it were, all these sort of locked in things of debt and money printing are deeply linked. Now, the problem with debt is you've got to pay your debt back, okay, when the time comes to you. What are some ways that you can pay off your debts? Anyone? How do you pay off your debt?
Borrow more.
Sorry?
Borrow more. Borrow more.
You borrow more. Okay, so borrow more is the second one I've got. The first one is you work hard and you pay off your debt. Okay, that should be the first one that everyone has. You work hard and you pay off your debt. Okay. The second one is you can go and say, sorry, I can't pay my debts. And you can foreclose. You can be sequestrated. Okay. The problem if you lend money to someone and they can't pay off their debt, suddenly you lose that asset that you had. The alternative is you can roll your debt. You can go and get someone to lend you more money. You know, it's that typical thing where the problem that they have in the United States, where people have two credit cards. So they spend on this credit card, they get to the end of their credit limit. And now they need to pay this credit limit. What am I doing? They go to get that credit card, do a little transfer, pay off that one there. And when that one's due, then they... Okay. Yeah. It's called rolling your debts. And the problem is that your interest begins to kill you because it starts to get bigger and bigger and bigger. Okay? Now, this is what you do for individuals. But if you're a government, you have exactly the same thing. How does the government pay off their debts? Well, the community of the people need to work hard and pay taxes. And the way the government will get taxes, they'll either increase taxes, they'll either hope that the economy grows so that their taxes can grow, or they can reduce their spending. Okay? So that's sort of, in a nutshell, what they can do to work hard. Or they can say, which governments have done throughout history, is say, actually, we don't really like this debt and we're not going to pay it back. Sorry. And if you're a pensioner or if you have someone that lent to the government, then it's not such a good thing. Or you can roll your debts. Now, this is something that happens in every major economy around the world. Governments roll their debts. They borrow short term and they just roll. They continue to borrow from other people to pay off that debt and they roll it. A couple of years ago, America instituted this thing called Operation Twist. Everyone's, what's Operation Twist? Yeah, they're adjusting the yield curve. What they were doing is they were borrowing, issuing long-term bonds. They were saying, they were paying off long-term bonds using short-term borrowings. So they were effectively using their credit card to pay off their house loan. Okay, something that's not sustainable, but it's what governments do around the world. Okay, but governments have one other alternative. What is the other alternative that a government has? They can print money. And this is what they're doing on a large scale. In fact, the central bankers around the world have said that they will do whatever it takes to stop debts from imploding. And specifically that they are willing to print money. In the United States it's called quantitative easing. In Europe, they've got different terms. In Japan, they call it Abenomics. Okay? They like to use big words. And the reason they like to use big words is if they said, look, guys, we're going to go print a whole lot of money and just sort of begin to pay off government debt, everyone would be up in arms. But if they said, no, look, we're instituting a quantitative easing scheme for which we're going to sort of increase the liquidity in the markets and, decrease the risk of deflation. No one knows what that said. Everyone's like, oh, really? They sound very clever. Good. I think you should do it. No. They mustn't do it, okay? This is what they're turning to on a large scale, okay? Around the world. So I've got a question for you. People have heard of hyperinflation once or twice before. How many times have there been hyperinflation in the last 100 years? Come on, any guesses? I have 6, 10. Who has had hyperinflation? Which countries?
Germany.
Germany? Zimbabwe? Greece has had hyperinflation? Okay, I can't hear. So I will tell you the answer. There have been 55 incidences of hyperinflation in the last 100 years. 55. That's on average more than one every 2 years. It's a regular event. Hey, you didn't know about that. I didn't know about it until I studied the number either. Very few economists know about that number. In fact, when I speak to professors at university who are telling people, hey, you need to be printing money, they don't know that number. They don't know the statistic. Boggles the mind. So what I've done here is I've created a little graphic. And we can just go through the graphic. We'll have a look at it. This shows all the hyperinflations that have happened in all the various different countries. I want you to see that hyperinflation happens in clumps. Okay? So let's go. So there was a whole lot of hyperinflations in the 1920s. Okay, Germany, Hungary, Russia, Poland, Austria. Then you had a whole lot of hyperinflations. You can see in the in the East, you had a bunch of hyperinflations in the 1940s. Then in the 1980s, you had a whole lot of hyperinflations in South America. And when the Berlin Wall came down and when communism collapsed, you had a whole lot of hyperinflations throughout the Eurasian area, and sort of a couple in Africa. DRC's had a couple, and that brings us to Zimbabwe, which has been the latest hyperinflation. 55 times it's happened in the last 100 years. Interesting statistic, eh? Interesting. Now, there's a fairly standard process that happens when a country goes into hyperinflation. Very standard. Happens every single time. People think, oh, it's money printing that leads a country into hyperinflation. Wrong. It's not. The process that leads a country into hyperinflation is first driven by debt. A country consumes and its government begins to expand beyond its ability to actually sustain itself. Okay? It's then borrowing and borrowing and borrowing, and you see these debts begin to expand beyond any reasonableness. Okay? Then a time comes when lenders say, hang on, I don't think that you can repay those debts. And they withdraw this privilege to borrow from those lenders. Suddenly, everyone starts to say, hang on, let's not lend to them, and they withdraw the lending facilities. And in response, the government prints money. But it is debt and the demands of debt that drive money printing. Okay, it's not just sort of, oh, someone decided to wake up one day and print money. No, it's debt that initially stimulates and pushes a country to printing money. Unfortunately, we don't have the time to go through the various, what we call gorge moments. You know, unique cultural shifts that lead a country into a hyperinflationary collapse. So you can read those in the book. I've dealt with it. So the question is, where is Europe? Where is Japan? Where is America in this process? Well, they're in this process of running up debt, but they haven't had a true credit crisis. In 2008, we had a major event, okay? Major banking crisis, and at that moment, the whole banking system was insolvent. And the only way that they could deal with it was to print money and bail out the banking system. But they have restored enough trust to say to lenders, continue lending. But they're printing money at the same time as well as sort of borrowing. So they haven't had the true credit crisis, but they are printing money on a large scale. Venezuela is far down the process of hyperinflation. They haven't yet reached the kind of excessive numbers, but they're probably, I think, at 700% inflation per year. Money printing, government control, pensioners losing everything, stores emptying, the same process. Okay. So let's just have a look quickly at global debt saturation. The United States currently have approximately $120 trillion owed by their government. 120 trillion. That's on average $1 million owed for every American family. Quite a lot. How about Japan? Japan have between 1 and 2 quadrillion yen in debt. How big is a quadrillion? Quadrillion is 15 zeros. Boggles the mind. A quadrillion is a billion million. It's a million people giving a billion yen. Okay. United Kingdom got debt. Eurozone got debt. Zimbabwe had a little amount of debt relative. Okay. So let's have a look at some global money printing. I'm bearing in mind that your next speaker is soon, so we'll begin to land. $3.5 trillion United States, $1.8 trillion Japan, and that sort of number is rapidly going up. Half a trillion from the UK. Europe between 1 and 2 trillion at the moment. I mean, that number is growing significantly. China are printing money on a massive scale. If you look in even this last week, they announced that they're implementing a significant money printing scheme. Okay, obviously in clouded words that no one will understand, but those who actually understand can see, hey, that's money printing right there. Significant money printing taking place in China. Then you got the central banks are printing money, giving it to the banks, who are then creating multiple levels more money. So in total in the last several years, you've had, give or take a couple of trillion, I mean these are estimates, about $20 trillion worth of money printing. Okay, and it's only the beginning. At the moment we're in a position, I'm not going to talk to this slide. Let's have a look currently at which currencies are currently in trouble at the moment. You can go to the Cato website. They have this thing called the Troubled Currencies Project, Cato website. And you can actually go and get a list, but they look in detail at every currency in the world and look at their inflation rates. So currently Venezuela is in a big problem, North Korea, Ukraine, Syria have a big problem, and those numbers are all really understated. I mean, these are official statistics, but if you get black market statistics, it's much, much higher. Structural longer-term risks, China has a big problem, and so is Japan. If Greece exited the Eurozone, they'd be in trouble, and a number of other economies. I'm going to open up to questions. I've got a newsletter sign up. What we do is we write a monthly email basically informing everyone this is what's happening to money printing right now as we speak. This is sort of how we're responding. You can get a copy of our books at takealot.com, and happy to sort of engage in discussion with you. I mean, obviously this is sort of high level introduction, but if we come back to the topic of the conference, navigating the future, this is one of the most critical issues of our time. Massive amounts of government debt around the world and the inability for them to repay. And they are beginning to turn to money printing on a very large scale. What will happen in the future? Well, certainly this will have an effect. Certainly will have an effect. Great. I'm going to hand over for any questions, if there are any questions.